So happy to be here once again with you all on the Reclamation Project. Yeah, we have a very interesting study today, and we're going to cover the subject of abandonment issues. And we hear this term a lot, and oftentimes we don't really truly understand it. The problem is that many of us, myself included, struggle with this thing called abandonment issues. So the first thing I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and define it for you and help us gain like sort of a baseline understanding of what abandonment issues are. So this is from WebMD, and this is what they say. They say abandonment issues stems from a fear of loneliness, which can be a phobia or a form of anxiety. These issues can affect your relationship and often stem from a childhood loss. Other factors that turn loss into abandonment issues include environmental and medical factors, genetics, and brain chemistry. Early childhood experiences, and we'll get back to that in a bit, but early childhood experiences are the biggest contributor to the development of abandonment issues when you become an adult. The traumatic event might include the loss of a parent by divorce or death, or not getting enough physical or emotional care as a child. So, this is something that may sound familiar already, and many of us may be thinking to ourselves, if you haven't figured this out already, that many of us do struggle with this. In fact, I had heard the term, kicked around for years before I really began to understand, one, that I had abandonment issues, and two, what they were. So, it's really important that we begin to get a grip on this, because this will explain so many things and unlock so many truths and understandings about ourselves and about the people around us. And we'll look at people a little bit differently with a little bit more empathy, and we won't just think that people are quote unquote crazy. This is from a therapist by the name of Mark Smith. He wrote a very interesting book on abandonment issues, and he says this. He says, abandonment pain is the deepest and most profound pain known to mankind. That's a pretty heavy way to start, wouldn't you say? But he says this. He says abandonment pain is the deepest and most profound pain known to mankind. Abandonment issues are wicked, brutal, explosive, crippling, damaging, and standing ever ready to completely ruin countless otherwise happy and peaceful moments or events. They're a raging bull in a fragile emotional china shop. They're an irritating bee buzzing around your head waiting to sting. They're a terrifying fire breathing dragon directing all of his or her fury, rage, and fire at you. And then he goes on to say the main problem with abandonment issues is that when it comes up inside of you, it takes you over. The experience is very much like being instantaneously drunk, impaired, reactive, defensive, out of control, irrational, stubborn, and absolutely impossible to objectively hear. And then he says, "Think Incredible Hulk," right? Um, and I can tell you this from my own experience, that when abandonment issues are triggered, you become incredibly irrational in your thought, in your words, and in your behavior. So it is very much like being under the influence of alcohol or some sort of substance, because you're not totally in control when the abandonment issues are in the driver's seat. So it's actually very dangerous. And a lot of things that we hear happening in relationships, spouses, you know, killing a spouse who wants to leave them, or something very unfortunate like that, starts with something like abandonment issues. It's actually very important to get a grip on this as soon as we can, because it would really prevent so much pain in our own lives and the lives of others. But he goes on and says abandonment issues cloud and distort reality. This is so true. Why? Because anytime that we have an irrational feeling or thought that distorts the way that we see things, the way that we hear things, the way that we experience things. And so we begin to live inside of this torment and this suffering that could be broken, this cage of torment and suffering that could be broken, and we could experience freedom and peace if only we could get control of the abandonment issues, because really there are a lot of things around us to be thankful for, and there are a lot of good things in our lives, but abandonment issues, they absolutely distort reality, like Mark Smith says. He says, what you see seems to be real, but it's actually a projection from within your own deeply wounded and abandoned soul. And then he talks about children, because again, abandonment issues, like we read from the WebMD article, abandonment issues typically stem from early childhood experiences, childhood traumas, and things like that. So Mark Smith makes this point. He says that children are extremely needy little creatures, and when those needs aren't met during childhood, the core of the adult, even decades later, is basically a sad, sometimes irrational, infantile, abandoned little kid. Obviously, um, that's going to cause problems in an adult relationship. So when you have an irrational, infantile, abandoned child inside of you that's in the driver's seat, and you're trying to have an adult relationship, that's going to cause some problems, right? Um, and the thing is that no matter how hard you try, no matter, a lot of us, especially men, we like to think that, we're big, strong, tough guys, that we're in control, that we're not weak little kids anymore, and we don't have abandonment issues and things like that. And so we try to run from this truth and the trauma of our painful past. But the reality is the more you try to run from it, the more it actually will take control of your life, whether you realize it or not, because a lot of this stuff is happening on a subconscious level. Some of you might be scoffing at what I'm sharing with you right now, thinking, oh, this is ridiculous. Like, I don't suffer for that. I don't know people who suffer from that. But again, this is happening on a subconscious level inside of us. And until we have some level of awareness that this even exists, then we won't know how to deal with it, and we won't recognize it when it comes up. Um, because the bottom line is, the harder you try to bury your emotional wounds and your childhood traumas and things like that, the more it will affect your life, your choices, and even the type of partner, romantic partner that you choose. Um, because what'll happen is, more than likely, you'll attract somebody or a significant other who will treat you very much the same way that maybe your parents or your primary caregiver did. And unfortunately, that's kind of like an immutable law of nature. It's just how it is. They say we marry our parents, right? And why do we do that? There's a couple reasons why. One is because as human beings, we are adaptable creatures. And as a child, you can't divorce your parents, right? You can't say, you know what, you guys are terrible parents. I'm going to leave now and I'm going to find new parents. You're stuck with your parents at least until you become old enough to get emancipated, or until you're 18, or until you become an adult. Whatever time you can experience the freedom to leave the nest and go out on your own, you're stuck with those parents, whether you like it or not, right? So as children, what we learn to do is we learn to survive and adapt to even the most dysfunctional, abusive situations. And if we exist in dysfunction long enough, what happens is we become comfortable in dysfunction. Okay. And when we become comfortable in dysfunction, what happens is the unhealed part of ourselves, of our psyche, seeks that out. So you ever wonder why a young lady, beautiful, smart young lady, might have a lot of suitors, and there might be some really nice guys, some gentlemen that like her and would like to, you know, um, uh, be with her in a relationship, and she chooses the rotten guy, the bad boy, the guy who mistreats her. Maybe it's because of things that she experienced when she was a child. She became comfortable in that dysfunction, and that bad boy that causes her nothing but pain and heartache actually represents what she's comfortable with, right? And so this is why we have to be very careful about how we treat our children, about how we love our children, about the messages that we send to our children, because oftentimes, because of the survival skills that children have to adapt to their dysfunctional environments, they'll end up unless they are healed through lots of work and self-awareness and therapy. And because I'm a Christian, I believe that the power of God um, can also heal some of these wounds as well. But unless they are putting in the work, they're going to gravitate towards situations that feel like what they're accustomed to. So that's why it's important that we treat our children well. And the second reason is because that little child who was neglected, who was abandoned, who sought after the love, the approval, and the affection of their parent or primary guardian and didn't get it, that little child is seeking that out. And now that they're an adult, they're saying, okay, I'm going to recreate the situation that I was raised in, but this time I'm going to win. This time I have more tools in my bag. This time I'm older, wiser, stronger, and I'm going to win that affection. So a lot of times they will attract somebody like their parents, like the neglectful caregiver or whatever, and they'll try and recreate that situation with the idea that this time they're actually going to get the things that they wanted and needed. And that is very, very true because I experienced that myself, for a long time as an adult. Um, Mark Smith goes on and he says, simply put, abandonment issues are a consistent hypersensitivity to any and all perceived or actual distancing in a relationship. Most of the time, what's seen as abandonment is only um, misperceived distancing, meaning we're looking at somebody's actions and behaviors and we're thinking, oh no, they're going to leave me. Oh no, they're trying to get away from me, because that's how abandonment issues work. Again, like I said, they're irrational, right? Um, he says a person suffering from severe abandonment issues is constantly hypervigilant about the possibility of being left behind in some way, shape, or form. They manufacture situations in their own minds in which they've been abandoned. Unfortunately, he says you can't fix abandonment. It's not like a cancer that you can simply cut out. It's too deeply embedded in our personalities or in the personalities of those who suffer from it. You know, and for those of us who are Christians, in Second Corinthians 5:17 um, it says, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature, right? Um, and I do believe that, in the sense that we are sort of recreated, right, from the ground up when we give our lives to God. But just like somebody who was a former alcoholic or drug addict or somebody who dealt with an issue that had a powerful grip over them, we have to constantly be vigilant, because if we allow that old man to come back up, guess what comes up with it? All the issues, all the addictions, right? So we are new creatures in Christ, but like Paul says, we have to die daily, right? We have to die daily to keep that old man buried, because when the old man comes back up, all that stuff comes back up with it, right? So I constantly have to maintain my closeness to God in order to be able to and maintain my self-awareness, studying constantly, understanding these things so that I can sort of manage these things in a healthy way. And this is something that is an ongoing process for me. Some things I believe they leave you quickly when you make a decision to change your life, and then some things are a more gradual process, and that's okay, right? Not everything is supposed to go away like that, right? How would we learn? We learn through experience and through struggle. That's how progress is made, and Paul talks about that, right? um but he continues on, and he says, um unless as a significant or he says, unless you see it, understand it, name it, and handle it non-reactively, calmly, and firmly, abandonment issues are always going to have some level of control in your life. And that's a very true thing, because in amongst therapists and in the therapeutic community, they often have this saying where they say, if you name it, you can tame it. And what that means is that if you can identify what's going on and put a name to it, what are you feeling in that moment? If you can say, I'm feeling anxiety, or I'm feeling a fear of abandonment, or I'm feeling, toxic shame, or whatever it is that you're feeling. If you name it, that is the first step. Just being aware, because otherwise it's like driving in the car with a drunk driver. Okay. But if you can name it and you can sort of identify what it is that you're feeling, that is step number one towards getting control over it and eventually, ultimately, healing. Um, that's kind of what abandonment issues are. Um, like I said, it's something that many of us struggle with. It's something that many of us deal with, and it's something that has caused havoc in our lives, in our heads, in our relationships for a very long time. And it's something that may have hurt ourselves or others. Many of us may have experienced broken relationships, divorces, things like that, all because we had unrecognized abandonment issues. And I know this again from personal experience, because I first found out that I had abandonment issues maybe about 8 years ago, sitting in a therapist's office when she, at my request, gave her clinical diagnosis of what my issues were. And she said, in no uncertain terms, I think that you have severe abandonment issues. And I didn't believe her at first until I went and started studying what abandonment issues were and looking at some of the signs of abandonment issues and recognizing that I had every single one of them. So it's kind of an eye opening experience. It's one of those things where you really have to be open minded and you can't dismiss it immediately, because learning this information may be just the thing that helps set you free from that prison of abandonment that you've been in for so long without even realizing it. It's like Jesus says in the book of John chapter 8. He says, "The truth shall make you free." Um so let's look at some signs that you have abandonment issues. This is how I came to accept that what therapy shared with me was actually pretty accurate. Um these are some common signs that you have abandonment issues. So, a fear of abandonment often kind of presents itself in people who seem like people pleasers, right? You ever see people who are constantly trying to make everyone happy and please them? That's because they don't want to be left, right? So they want to make sure everybody's happy, because as long as everybody's happy and content with them, that means that everybody will stay with them. Because that's, again, what are abandonment issues all about? It's the irrational fear of being abandoned. It's the irrational fear that you won't be able to survive without these people in your life, whoever they are. Um, it's if you have a need to constantly be reassured that you're loved. Some of us are in marriages and we have to constantly ask our spouse, "Do you love me?" You know, and we constantly want them to. I mean, it's good to hear that you're loved, right? But if we're in a marriage and we've been married for years and we're still wondering and we still need reassurance, that's typically because we want to make sure that they love us. Because if they love us, maybe that means they won't leave us, right? So we constantly are vigilant about that, and it's actually, we should live with a certain level of security in our relationships, knowing that the person that we're with cares about us and that they love us. We shouldn't be constantly needing reassurance that we're loved. If that's the case, then there's a problem either in your relationship or with you. You know, um, and there's some other signs as well. So again, giving too much or being overly eager to please, being people pleasers. Another one is jealousy, right? When you see jealous people in your relation, that are jealous in their relationships or jealous of other people, it's really interesting, because it makes no sense to people who are outside of that relationship. Sometimes people are jealous of, obviously, potential competition for their romantic partner. Sometimes people are jealous of friends, anybody that may in any way take time away from them with their partner, and that's really unhealthy, right? Because we should not try to have all our emotional needs for emotional nourishment met by our romantic partner or spouse. or one person, because that's a lot of pressure to put on one person. But a lot of us, what we try to do is we try to form these codependent relationships with our significant other, and we try to keep all other people out of the relationship because we want to make sure they're mine, they're going to stay with me, I'm going to be safe forever, and I'm not going to be abandoned. And that's irrational and it's unhealthy because, again, it puts a lot of pressure on people. Sometimes parents with abandonment issues are even jealous of the kids. If the spouse spends too much time with the kids, and they begin to form resentments towards their own children, and this especially happens with stepchildren, so jealousy from abandonment issues is a very common thing, and we may have seen these things sometimes in with people that we know and think, wow, they're crazy, like what's wrong with them, why would they be acting like this? Well, they probably have abandonment issues, right? They're probably just, they're not maybe bad people or quote unquote crazy, but maybe they just have serious abandonment issues and they just need understanding and empathy, right? um if you have trouble trusting your partner's intentions, right? If you always think, oh, they're going to leave me, or they're going to hurt me, or they're going to do this, that's a sign that you might have abandonment issues. Feeling insecure about your relationship, again, that stems from the jealousy, right? Constantly feeling unsure and needing reassurance of that you're loved, that's a sign that you might have abandonment issues. Needing to control or be controlled by your partner. Now, you might say, well, what does that have to do with abandonment issues? Well, for me, one of my things was, I want to make sure that everyone around me is healthy and living their best life and eating right and staying away from things that aren't healthy for them, because if they do that, then they'll live a long time, and then they'll be with me forever, and then that'll, maybe increase the probability that I won't be abandoned. So you can see what's behind this. So if somebody's like, hey, don't eat that, or stop drinking that, or don't watch that, or don't listen to that, or don't go here, don't go there, and you might think, why are they trying to control every aspect of my life? What a possessive, weird, strange person. um and you know you may even have fights with people over the fact that they're not living the way that you think they should and living the healthiest lifestyle, and they might interpret it as you being possessive and jealous and sick. But in reality, you might just be afraid that if they continue doing this thing, that they might end up not being well and leaving this world, dying, passing away. And so that's where that need to control comes from. So a lot of times when you see people who are super possessive and controlling, it's not necessarily because they just want to domineer over another person. It's because they have a fear that that person is going to die and leave them. It's another manifestation of abandonment issues. um and another sign that somebody has abandonment issues is people who settle for unsatisfactory relationships, right? They're with someone who they're not really happy with, they're not really that compatible with, they don't really have a lot in common with this person, and yet they're with them anyway, and you wonder why. And the reason why often is because, hey, it's better, the way some people to look at it is, it's better to be with somebody that, in a relationship that's not totally satisfactory than to be alone. Why? Because they have abandonment issues. um and of course, we all know that that's not a healthy way of looking at things, because sometimes you can be in a relationship with somebody and be lonelier than if you were on your own. Sometimes singleness is a gift. So, we all have to keep that in mind. But so those are just a few signs that you might have abandonment issues. If you were to do some self-study and just start to Google abandonment issues and things like that, you can find lots of articles and lots of books on the subject of abandonment issues. One that I highly recommend is called Journey from Abandonment to Healing by Susan Anderson. That's Journey from Abandonment to Healing by Susan Anderson. And I'll be referencing that in a little bit as I go over some of the material from that book. But it's a very powerful book, and I would consider it the quintessential book on the subject of abandonment issues, that I've read anyway. Um, but so how do the question is, so we've looked at what abandonment issues are. We've looked at some of the signs of abandonment issues. Now we want to look at how abandonment issues occur. And we've kind of hinted at that a little bit, but let's get more specifically into the how part of abandonment issues. So now this is not an all-inclusive list, but I just kind of want to give you some understanding of how abandonment issues might begin. So, I mentioned earlier childhood trauma, right? Childhood trauma causes any number of emotional disorders and wounds and things like that that affect us sometimes throughout our entire lives. And it's just sad when you see people who are, in their 40s and 50s and even 60s and 70s that may still be suffering from childhood trauma. So early childhood trauma is one way that abandonment issues occur. Another one is family of origin issues. So if you've had like a problematic, difficult family upbringing, that's one way. Just a dysfunctional family of origin, just any sort of dysfunction is, you know, a definitely oftentimes a source of abandonment issues. One big one is emotionally unavailable guardians. So this is where you have parents who just, they're so preoccupied with, their own lives, maybe seeking love themselves. This happens especially with single parents. Sometimes they, I've seen them be more and I'm not saying all. Sometimes there are single parents who are very dedicated and focused on their children, but I have personally, on many occasions, seen single parents who were more concerned with uh, finding love and finding a partner and being with somebody to get their emotional needs met than meeting the emotional needs of their child. And so, when your emotional guardian and parent is unavailable, that can cause abandonment issues. Um, Exposure to physical or mental illness can cause abandonment issues. A history of low self esteem can cause abandonment issues. And pretty much any level of abuse or neglect is going to oftentimes cause some sort of abandonment issues. So, you know, I'll give you an example from my own personal life. My father was was a very young man. My parents were very young when they had me. My mother was 18 and my father, um, he was 20 years old. And so they were really just kind of kids themselves. And yet here I come. And my father, he definitely wasn't perfect. My mother and father were trying to raise me with the tools that they were given from their own family of origins, and those tools were not great. um, and my mother often says, kids, when she talks about when I talk about how we were raised, she unapologetically says kids did not come with don't come with an instruction manual. But unfortunately, when we're kind of going on what we've been taught in our previous family, if what we've been taught in our previous family of origin was wrong, then when we raise our children, we simply are perpetuating the trauma, the emotional issues, and it becomes this generational curse or this generational cycle that is never broken and gets perpetuated on and on and on. And you see that a lot in families and certain cultures and things like that. And so it's important, it's up to us who are raising our children now, it's up to us to say, enough is enough. Whatever this is, the toxic shame, the abandonment, whatever it may be, it ends with me. And the first step to doing that is finding out about these issues, learning what they are, and learning how to overcome them. So, one thing to keep in mind about abandonment issues, again, I have to say this repeatedly because oftentimes people with abandonment issues are labeled as crazy, possessive, controlling, insane, any number of pejorative terms that you could think of for somebody who's struggling with issues. And I was called crazy at times. And what I found out in therapy was that actually I wasn't crazy. I was just a little broken, you know? And that's what we have to understand is empathy is so important, because abandonment issues are, really what it is it's just sort of like a maladaptive coping skill. It's just you just don't know how to deal with, the fear of being abandoned. And so these, behaviors and the way that they manifest themselves in the irrational behaviors and words and thoughts, those are just maladaptive coping skills. And we're employing them to try and keep ourselves safe, not because we're bad people or crazy people or we want to control everybody. It's none of that. But Susan Anderson, she talks about um, sort of 5 stages of abandonment, and it's very interesting. And she uses the acronym SWIRL, right? SWIRL, to talk about the 5 stages of abandonment. It's very interesting. We'll go over it quickly here. She says in her book, Journey from Abandonment to Healing, that there are 5 stages of abandonment, and that is shattering, withdrawal, internalizing, rage, and lifting. So those are the 5 stages: shattering, withdrawal, internalizing, rage, and lifting. Okay. So what is shattering? Ooh, I've experienced this to the fullest. She says, your relationship is breaking apart. Your hopes and dreams are shattered. You are devastated, bewildered. You succumb to despair and panic. You feel hopeless and have suicidal feelings. Um, you know, when, in the Bible, it says that a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. I mean, literally, physically, right? When two people are intimate, they connect literally and they become one. And then figuratively, you join together with your spouse, your life partner, and you become as one, right? Become one flesh, one body. So when that relationship breaks apart for whatever reason, you know, I would say the vast majority of people aren't just able to go, well, whatever. We had a good run. Have a good one. Take care. Um, because your idea was that when you married this person and you became involved with this person, that this was going to be forever, that this was going to be the last stop. You were hanging up the gloves. There was no more, going out and seeking and searching. This was it. You were going to have a family. You were going to have a good life. You were going to build an empire together, and you were going to have all your emotional needs for love and affection met by this person, and all the things that you didn't get during your childhood, you were now finally going to get. And now the relationship is ending for whatever reason. And I'm not here to judge anybody about anything. I'm just talking about the reality. I sat I sat alone for a year and a half, separated from my wife, many years ago, uh, in this very exact state, pretty much just about positive that it was done. And here we are many years later, and then we were able to work it out by the grace of God. Um, but it's tough because you've now become one flesh with this person, and now your relationship is breaking apart, and it feels like you're severing a limb. Like it really feels like that. If you ask most people if they would rather divorce their spouse or get hit with a bat in the head, most people would say, I'll take that bat in the head. It's that painful when you're experiencing the shit. She says, you succumb to despair, you feel hopeless and have suicidal feelings. You feel symbiotically attached to your lost love, mortally wounded as if you'll die without them. How many songs have we heard in the world where people talk about, I can't live without you, right? Um, I will die without you. I can't breathe without you, right? That's how we feel. And when we're experiencing that severing, when we have that symbiotic attachment with the person that we love, that we've become one flesh with, and we're now being torn apart from them, it feels like we're going to die. I can't put it any other way. She says, you're in severe pain, shock, sorrow. You've been severed from your primary attachment. You're cut off from your emotional lifeline. Oof, that is not a fun place to be. That is definitely not a fun place to be. Um, I am man enough to admit that I have spent many nights in tears, um, trying to cope with the immense, enormous pain of the shattering process. Then she says the next part of this is withdrawal. And so she says painful withdrawal from your lost love. The more time goes on, the more all of the needs your partner was meeting begin to impinge into your every waking moment. You are in writhing pain from being torn apart. You yearn, ache, and wait for them to return. Love withdrawal is just like heroin withdrawal, and she's not being hyperbolic. This is the truth. There's actual physiological science to show that the withdrawal that we feel when we have lost love is exactly the same thing that we go through when we're losing heroin, or when we're withdrawing from some kind of drug like heroin. There's actually a book. I think I read it years ago by, I believe his name was Howard M. Halpern, and it was actually called How to Break Your Addiction to a Person. Because we actually do become addicted to people, because people, when we experience love or certain things, it releases chemicals in our body, oxytocin, dopamines, things like that, that are the exact same chemical reactions as when we do cocaine or heroin. So in a very much the same way, it's exactly like that. When she talks about love withdrawal and heroin withdrawal, she says each involves the body's opiate system and the same physical symptoms of intense craving. During withdrawal, you are feeling the wrenching pain of love loss and separation, the wasting, weight loss. I can't even tell you how much weight I lost. I could lose a few pounds now, but boy, back then I had gotten really thin because I had no desire to eat oftentimes. Wakefulness, wishful thinking, and waiting for them to return. You crave a love fix to put you out of the withdrawal symptoms. Whew, that is a tough spot to be. I have to tell you. I'm going to move a little quickly during the last one. She says internalizing. Internalizing. You internalize the rejection and cause injury to your self-esteem. So this is where you start to blame yourself, right? This is where you start to say, oh, if only I had done this, if only I had done that, if only I'd been more attentive, more sensitive, less demanding, and you kind of beat yourself up, with all of this regret over the relationship being lost, and you kind of idealize the abandoner, right? At the expense of your own self-image. Oh, if they only came back, I would do this now. And often, as they say, it takes two to tango, right? It takes two to tango. And then there's rage, where you become angry, at your abandoner. And then there becomes sort of the lifting part, and that's gradually you begin to get a sense of who you are, and of your value as a person, and you feel like you are wiser and stronger for the painful lessons that you've learned. And so those are kind of like the 5 stages of abandonment. It's called swirl, right? um Shattering, withdrawal, internalizing, rage, and lifting. um Now I've broken down what abandonment issues are, you know what some of the symptoms are, how they happen. We've even talked about the 5 stages of abandonment. Now let's talk about, some of you might be like, okay, clearly I have these issues, but how in the heck do I overcome them? Well, the first thing that I could recommend, that I would be remiss as a Christian if I did not say that I strongly believe that a connection with God is the first step to overcoming abandonment issues. The second step is finding your way into a good therapist office. Now, some of us may scoff at that, especially Christians. Christians are especially notorious for scoffing at the idea of therapy, because they say, oh, just pray about it. Well, you know what? When you break a leg, do they say, don't go to the hospital, just pray about it? No, they'll take you to the hospital, you'll get a cast put on it, and you'll get the medical attention that you need. Well, guess what? Just like everybody has physical wounds that need to be addressed through doctors and things like that, we have emotional wounds. And Dr. Carlton Oler used to say, everybody needs a checkup from the neck up. But yet Christians seem to think that they have all the answers and they don't need to do anything other than pray about it, not realizing that perhaps God, put people on this earth who understand the human condition so much that they can actually help unlock some things that you didn't understand and bring you closer to Him. So, and I believe Paul, man, if you look at Philippians chapter 4 and some of the things that he's written throughout, his writing, I believe that this man had a very deep understanding of the human condition. But the second thing is finding yourself into a therapist's office. I believe it's important, and I believe for me it was a pivotal moment for me. It was a life-changing experience, and the reason why I'm here talking to you about this today is because of the pain that I went through and my choice to try therapy. Because at that point, I'm on my own. I felt I've lost everything seemingly, and I figured, what have I got to lose? And man, that was the best choice that I could have ever made, was finding myself into a therapist's office. And this is how I began to understand these deep subjects and become literally obsessed with studying some of these things because it was so fascinating to me and it brought me much healing. Um, but one thing that Susan Anderson says in Journey from Abandonment to Healing, she says, the recovery task for the healing stage is to take hold of yourself one moment at a time, recognizing that you are a separate person, a fully capable adult, responsible for your own self care. It's no one else's responsibility to meet your emotional needs. Only you can do that. Emotional self reliance involves accepting the intense feeling of the experience, taking stock of your present reality, and assuring yourself that you will survive. I would add, emotional self-reliance and emotional reliance on God, but that's because I'm a Christian, right? Um, Now, here are a few suggestions to help overcome abandonment issues. So the first one is just getting clear on the origin. A lot of people don't like to dig up old stuff. It sucks. It's not fun. Okay. My therapist said it's going to get worse before it gets better, and boy was she right. Looking at some of that stuff from my past, understanding that basically, my family of origin was so dysfunctional and shot that I really had no shot at a healthy, happy, peaceful life because my brain was just miswired from all of the trauma. That's not fun, but that's the first step. Because unless you understand the origin, you're going to go around confused and thinking maybe I am just crazy, right? No, maybe you just had a difficult upbringing and your brain got miswired because of the things that you experienced. And now you are using maladapted coping skills and coping mechanisms to try and get your needs met, but it ain't working. Right. So that's the first step. The second step is to validate your own feelings, right? Instead of getting angry at yourself for feeling a certain thing, recognize it. Again, if you name it, you can tame it. What am I feeling in this moment? Okay, I'm feeling fear that I'm going to be abandoned, or I'm feeling abandoned. And you know, when you feel that way, and you recognize that you're feeling that way, that's a huge thing, is just to be able to articulate what it is that you're feeling. Because when you can do that, then you can say, okay, now what am I going to do about it? So when you recognize what you're feeling and you validate your feelings and emotions, it's a huge step towards getting them under control. The next step is, once you've recognized and validated your feelings, to ask yourself, why do I feel this way? Because here's the big answer to a lot of questions. Because when we start to, is this real? Like, is this person really going to leave me because they got angry and we had an argument? If this person does leave me, am I going to die? You know, and if you really look at it, a lot of times we find that the pragmatic, logical part of ourselves is going, well, no, of course not, right? but we'll never have that experience until we have that conversation with ourselves. Now, once we do, then we ask ourselves, okay, now that I recognize what it is and where it's coming from, now that I recognize why I'm feeling this way and that's irrational, now what am I going to do? Am I going to continue to allow this irrational thought to dictate and control my words, my feelings, my actions, my emotions? Or am I going to say, nope, I'm not going to do this today. And I'm going to allow the logical, pragmatic part of my mind to take over. And I'm going to go on and enjoy the rest of my day because this is a nonsensical, irrational, childish thought. And I'm done with that. I'm going to hand this over to God and I'm going to move on in peace, knowing that God has got me. That's the way I handle it, right? Another good thing that we can do is create a positive support system, right? Surround yourself with people who are honest, but who are also supportive, right? The people who lift you up, who support you, who's in your corner. And if you don't have a positive support system, well, it's probably a good time to start working on developing one, right? Because we can never have enough good people in our lives. The next one is to, and this is a big one, is to acknowledge your strengths, your virtues, what you have to offer as a person. Once you realize your value as a person, that is huge because when you understand what you bring to the table in any relationship, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship, then you understand that there are so many people in this world who would love to have a relationship with you, who would love to have a friendship with you. And if the person that you're with or that you desire is too dense to recognize your value, then them leaving is probably addition by subtraction. So, and my father used to always say, um, don't be with the one who you love, be with the one who loves you. And that was his way of saying, don't chase people who don't want you and don't recognize your value. If there is somebody who recognizes your value and they truly appreciate you, then that's your time is better spent there. And the final thing is just you need to recognize that you have the power to overcome these abandonment issues. Now it may be something that constantly creeps up in your life, you know just like there may be temptation for somebody who is an alcoholic to drink again, or who used drugs to use again. But as long as you recognize that you have the power to overcome, you can and you will. And so I know this was a heavy subject. I could have gone much deeper into this. I'm really just scratching the surface. I recognize that there's a lot more to talk about here, and I invite you to continue studying the subject of abandonment issues. Lots of great YouTube videos that you could watch, and I highly recommend Susan Anderson's book, Journey from Abandonment to Healing. So anyway, it was a pleasure being with you all on the Reclamation Project, and I hope you all enjoyed the talk. Take care.